Hola. Hello, everyone. Hi. I'm going to start. I'm Javier Ferrer. I work at NN. It's an insurance company. And basically, I'm the head of the Agile Center of Excellence in Spain. I'm also working for a group in the Netherlands, supporting the countries across Europe and Japan in their transformations. And what I'm going to tell you today, it's basically our transformation journey here in Spain. So most of you, I'm sure that you already know lots of frameworks. And I want to emphasize that this is our story. It doesn't mean that you can copy and paste this transformation. As you all know, transformations are highly contextual. So it really depends on the company. It depends on the setup. And we have our own, let's say, NN scaling model that we kind of build in-house and that might work for us. It doesn't mean that you can apply it to any other company. Maybe you will be able to pick up some elements of it. So I hope that by the end of the presentation, there will be a couple of ideas maybe that you can take away and you might use in your local context. So just to make sure that this really depends on the company. Just to position how we did it, we are using a combination of Scrum, Kanban, and Spotify and Safe to a certain degree. So let's say we use Scrum and Kanban at team level, and we do the scaling using Spotify elements and Safe. And you will probably recognize some of it in the slides I'm going to show you. So first of all, just a short introduction of what NN is. We're an insurance company with a long history, as you can see here. It's more than a century ago that it was founded. It's a Dutch company. During some years, I mean, in Spain, we've been working for 40 years now, over 40 years. And for several years, we were also part of ING. So some people still confuse us, or they think we are ING, but we're not. But we still work with them, so they're also a partner. And recently, we acquired other companies. We are present in many countries, 18. As I mentioned before, mainly Europe and Japan. And you can see there the numbers of the customers, the number of employees, just to give you a sense of the size of the company. And this is basically in Spain. So in Spain, we have over 40 branches. It's an insurance business. We sell insurance products, saving products. And we have like almost 800,000 customers. So, and you know, we use asset under management as one of the metrics. So you can get a feeling of the size of the company. And also, in terms of NPS and employee engagement, just in general terms, we are doing fine. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's a company where customers are kind of happy and employees as well. So just for you to understand that it's an insurance company, we work in a highly regulated environment. So it means that sometimes we have to do things that, you know, you have to comply by law. And it means that you will have to face complexity that maybe other companies in different industries might not. So it's not the same thing being a startup than being a financial institution. So that also frames how you have to scale. So just a short recap of our journey. This was a kind of drawing we came up with at the beginning, just to illustrate how it's going to look like. So it's a journey. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be tough times, and it's going to take a while. So this is not you're not going to transform a company in 3 months, neither in 6 months. It might take over a year, and sometimes much more. And this is just a way of trying to communicate the vision at the beginning, and how you translate that into, let's say, execution in a country. So, for example, in Spain, we came up with this kind of structure, meaning that we combine a group of people from different areas, and you can see people from HR, which is key. we're always talking about people, people, people. It's key to involve HR because you're going to redesign the company. You will have to think of a lot of people-related aspects, and they have to be in the team. You also need people that understand way of working. So whether it's a PMO, Center of Excellence, however you want to call it, you need people that really know how to execute, that they know agility. In our case, being an insurance company, risk management, we manage risk, we buy and sell risks. So it's a key thing. So maybe in other companies you might not have this component, but for us as a company, it's also key. And of course, you need top management involvement, meaning that as part of the transformation team, you should have a very good relationship with your top guys, meaning CEO, CTO, whatever. So in the end, where you're trying to build a team that it's touching the top management, but it's kind of in the middle of the company, so it can work with all the key stakeholders. And you see the circle around it, it's communications, it's key. I mean, part of the process, it's explaining things. And you have to explain the same thing sometimes 20 times, and in different ways, in different forums. And you have to, and sometimes people overlook it. It's like, okay, we're going to start working on things, and we forget communication. So communication is key, because if this is a cultural change, it means you have to really make sure that people get it. And what was high level the scope of this team? When you're working in transformation, you have to think about, okay, how are you going to design the company? So the first point, organizational design. Probably the way you are structured, it's not going to help you when you want to do agility. So you have to rethink the whole organizational construction. People and culture, you have HR, but this is also about changing behaviors, changing mindset. You know it, I'm not going to tell it. So it's a big, big thing, how you manage people and change related to people. Also, way of working and tooling. I mean, this is a new kind of paradigm. It's a new way of working. Probably it's going to be completely different from the past if you come from a kind of waterfall environment. So you really need to put in place a lot of new processes, tools, methods. You have to train people and make sure that little by little they get adopted. So it's going to take a while. And okay, in our case, risk management was a big thing. So you have to make sure, basically, that you don't break anything. Basically, these guys are trying to make sure that you don't break things. And also communications, you know? So that's kind of the mix. And what we're trying to achieve is, okay, these are some high-level goals that we defined at the beginning, that why are we changing? Because we want to improve the focus on our customer, we want to improve employee engagement, also speed of delivery, and also the fact is that you are in a competitive market, and there are many companies in the financial space where this is becoming the norm. So if you work in that sector, you have to be there. And there are several KPIs. We have much more at high level. You know, you have to basically define, okay, what are we trying to achieve? You know, what are the KPIs, the objectives as a company we want to improve? And of course, this is an iterative process. So you will have to learn, adapt, inspect, and adapt, and see many things. So in the end, what we came up in terms of organization, it's something like this. So we have tribes, we have chapters, and we have, let's say, a change organization and run organization. So in the end, you will recognize that this is kind of Spotify-based, but we wanted to make sure that, you know, it makes sense for us. So what is a tribe? You might think. It's kind of a value stream, so you have to define something that goes end-to-end in terms of responsibility, and that makes sense. And there are some principles that we came up with on how we define a tribe. You know, what are the criteria that define that a tribe is a tribe and not something else? So we came up with something we call the tribe principles, and we had a lot of discussions internally. So how you define this structure is not something that you can do as a separate team in an office. So we engage a lot the organization. We had offsites, like many companies, with like middle top management. So we also engage them via exercises, games, like, okay, guys, considering the strategy of the company, how do you think we should define the new organizational design. What do you think it makes sense? So engaging the organization in this process is also key because they will feel that whatever you come up with, it's also their input. So it's not coming from the top, you're also listening to them, so they are kind of co-creating the final design. So the principles basically, and we explain these principles to middle and top management, like, okay guys, think like, if we have to define a tribe, think of something along these lines. So tribes have to be autonomous, have to be independent, and basically they have to be ideally no overlaps, meaning that they are separate, they will have conflicting objectives. They also have to be stable. You know, teams have to be stable, but tribes also have to be stable. So don't define something that 6 months later will not make sense. Also, in terms of size, to be able to manage that, they need to be of a certain size. I mean, 10 people cannot be a tribe, 300 neither. So when you define this, think along these criteria. And also, in the end, the whole idea is that you have to divide your strategy in tribes. So in the end, if you add all those tribes, you're going to be able to deliver the strategy. Because in the end, they are just constructs to deliver your KPIs and your business. And they should be sort of comparable. You don't want to come up with a tribe which is 4 times bigger than another one. Because then, in terms of resources, people, budget, it's going to be a tough competition. So if you balance them, you will have healthier discussions in terms of priorities when there are conflicts. And basically, there should be a change, meaning you don't copy the current organization, but it doesn't mean that you're going to spend a lot of money or time doing this, because you don't want to lose momentum. You need to keep the momentum. Transformations, you have a momentum, and if you really delay them along, maybe you will not make it. So that was what we came up as design principles for the tribes. And in the end, we also have teams. And teams, you know, are a collection of people from different chapters, meaning also business and IT. So we have business and IT people working together. So it's not just IT teams, it's people from product development, people from marketing, from the different skills. So the whole idea is that as much as possible, they can deliver business and IT. Yeah, and what is a chapter, you might say? Okay, probably you have read Spotify and you have an understanding of what a chapter is. So in our case, considering this, that we have some teams are part of the tribes and some teams will be kind of outside in other areas of the company that are maybe support functions, let's say finance. So finance might be in the round part of the structure. But still, no matter what, you're going to have teams, because in the end, people are located in all these areas. And the chapter leads go across. So a chapter lead might have people that are part of a tribe, might have people that are outside the tribe, depending on the typology of the chapter. Yeah. So, for example, we ended up with kind of 3 types of chapters. So, meaning that some chapters, most of the people, they go to Agile teams, meaning Scrum teams. Other chapters might be more run, because they're still running processes, BAU activities, and some chapters might be a mix. So you might have 10 people, and 5 of them might go to Scrum teams, and others will continue doing, let's say, business as usual activities. So when you define the chapters, you have to think, okay, how do I define the chapter? What type of chapter it is? Because what you see on the bottom part of the slide, the way you manage the team is going to be different. The way you engage the team is going to be different, because just to keep it very simple, if you are a completely 100% change chapter, means that on a daily basis, as a chapter lead, you are not going to see your people, because they're going to be working in Scrum teams. But if you are on the other side of the spectrum, if you are a run chapter, it means that you are always with your people. So the way you get feedback, the way you manage them, it's different. People that are chapter leads on the change part, they can basically influence and develop the team on how to work. It's about a practice, how you develop them in terms of how, but let's say they have no say on the what. meaning that the what is determined by the squads. But if you're a run chapter, you both have to take care of the what and the how. So it really depends on that, because when you change the company, the structure, you have to basically make sure that you explain to each one of the chapters how their life is going to be. Because most likely, most of them, they used to be managers, directors, so people from mid-management, that they were to manage their teams. But from one day to another, it's going to be different, and maybe from one chapter lead to another as well. So you have to make sure that you understand how it's going to be for them, how you communicate with them, so they don't feel threatened and they understand their new role. Then another thing that you might think about, okay, you're changing the company and there might be processes, tools, etc., that were managed by certain people. So you have to do something like understanding, okay, well, probably you have an inventory of what are your apps or your platforms, your processes, etc., and define who is going to do what. I mean, in the end, if you want to create stable teams, one of the things that might help is that understanding, okay, what's the scope? The scope might be also related to what are they doing. What are they doing might be also related to platforms, apps, or whatever. So, and it will later on define what's the scope of your daily work. So it's a process, because and you have to do it kind of thoroughly to make sure that there's clarity on who does what, because you are completely reshuffling the structure, and there will be moments of chaos, and you have to do a lot of communication, and people that were used to talk to this manager, if they have an issue, now they have to understand to whom they have to talk. And there has to be clarity and transparency on how the new structure is going to be dealing with work. Yeah. And also we have run teams. So we said, we don't want to basically just focus on transforming the change part of the company, like everything regarding change, but we want to approach it at a full transformation, meaning that everybody can work in a lean, agile way. So we said, okay, Kanban teams, it's a good method, a good way of working that can be used for run teams. So let's not just focus on creating Scrum teams, creating tribes, but we also want to basically Kanbanize the work of run chapters. So we said, okay, we're going to have Kanban teams. And you might have Kanban teams within a tribe. So as a tribe, you have full-end responsibility of something. It means that you might change stuff, but you also run processes. So you create new products, but you also service them. So you might have Kanban teams also inside or outside the tribes. In the end, it's run activities. And also another area you have to put a lot of work, it's training. So we did a lot of training on introduction and to both sides of the company. And this is a hell of a work in the sense that you need a team that really can support this, and you're going to train everybody. Because you don't want to train people on the change part, because then the people on the run will say, okay, I'm not part of this, They are the nice guys, the sexy ones, and we are here the old-fashioned way. So you don't want to create this comparison between two worlds, let's say. So you have to make sure that you address both sides of the organization. And you have to also think how you connect everything. Because in the end, when you scale, there will be connections between both sides of it. And then just a short slide on HR. And you have to really rethink the whole, or lots of agile, let's say, HR-related processes. So, for example, performance management. Who's going to assess who and why? I mean, normally, if you're the manager, you do the assessment of your team. But now, okay, what if I'm a product owner? Who's going to do the assessment for me? What if I'm a coach? What if I'm a Scrum Master? What if I'm working in one team? But it depends. If I'm part of a change chapter, my chapter lead is not going to see me. But if I'm part of a run chapter, yes. So the whole performance management, you really need to think about it, because most of the people, when you say, okay, now you're going to be part of this chapter, the first thing they want to say is, okay, so who's my boss, and who's going to do my performance assessment? So this is something you have to explain. Also, the fact that there's, I'm not going to talk about T-shapes things, because T-skills, but in the end, you also try to grow, no matter where you are, into just more, let's say, side-to-side skills. You might be an expert on something, but you want to grow people on the side, And also the way you recruit and onboard. Of course, when you recruit somebody, you need to recruit, and you're recruiting for certain skills. But you also have to find the way you recruit it. If you want to achieve enterprise agility, also you have to think about, okay, certain values of people, like lifelong learning, people that are really open to change, that they can adapt, and that they will be flexible enough to move from one team to another. That they also have people skills, because the way they're going to work, it's also important, not just the skill set. And that's also part of the assessment when you change your, let's say, recruitment and onboarding processes. And how you coach them, you also have to think about it. Who's going to coach them? How they're going to do it? So this is a lot of work. How you do the selection of your POs, for example. The new Agile roles, you have to think about how you're going to do it. So if you can do it lightly, like, okay, you guys are going to become for tomorrow POs, probably it's not going to work. So what are the personality traits that you want to find in those POs or coaches? So how you measure that? Probably you will need assessments. You will need to say, okay, we have a pool of candidates. How you identify that pool of candidates? How you assess their personalities, their leadership style, their qualities, whether they're going to fit or not on new positions. So if you get that data, probably you will get better outcomes. But you also have to work on all that. And also communication. So communication, you have to do it emails, videos, offsites, everything. Your boss, the chapter lead, everybody. So how you communicate this, it's part of the transformation, and you have to be always there. And you might send one email, and later on you might get a lot of questions, so you have to iterate, and you have to make sure that you align the communication with the transformation. And then something that I personally believe makes sense, and that you might want to have in any Agile company, it's a group of people that drive this, and that will make sure that it will be sustainable over time. In our case, it's a center of excellence, and for me, in the end, a certain Agile center of excellence has to have certain values, certain aspects. So who's going to be there? And then you go back to, okay, who's going to be part of it, how you make sure that you choose the right people. So you want people that really get this. So they understand servant leadership. They can build trust. They can create bridges. They also are passionate about lean and agile, because you really need to like this to be able to communicate it. Otherwise, it's going to be like, okay, somebody tell me a story. And also that they're open to learn. They have to be lifelong learners, because this is, and you're coming here year after year because you want to keep on learning. So you have to really get this mindset, because if you have the person that, okay, I know everything, maybe it's not going to work. And also people that are empathic, and they kind of get the emotional intelligence, because this is a lot about people, coaching. So you might try to find people that have those traits. And also that they can be persuasive and they can motivate. So these are some aspects that when you try to build that center of excellence, or however you want to call it, just maybe it makes sense to have in mind. And this is about also systems thinking. I mean, in the end, all this story I'm telling you, it's about building a new system of work. And Deming, systems thinking, but in the end, a system has to be managed. I mean, you need somebody supporting the system, otherwise, maybe by itself, it's not going to improve. So somebody has to take care of this. And the scope of this team might be different, but in the end, you want to make sure that you understand portfolio. You want to make sure that you manage dependencies across teams, and also that you do some measurements, metrics, etc. These also might differ between companies, but it's about how you align a strategy to execution, basically. So you might have coaches, also product owners on the how, not on the what. So you want to make sure that all product owners, whoever is defining products, work in the same way. If you just say they depend on somebody who's in charge of the what, maybe when you start trying to coordinate things, they're going to work different. And basically, these guys are generating the work, the backlogs, the work items. So you need some level of consistency. And you need, some kind of profiles, and to make sure that you touch those three layers. And also, this is an example of what we did. So we've trained most of the company. It's 350 in Madrid. So plus 200 in Kanban. And in SAFE, we have 1 out of 7 people in the company certified and much more trained. So, I mean, it's a huge effort in terms of training, making sure that people get it, just part of the transformation process. And now I will move on how we do portfolio and program management, meaning how we connect strategy to teams. Yeah? So we have something called our 3-year plan. So as a multinational, probably if you work in one, you have things like this. So every year you have to say, okay, what do we want to achieve the next 3? So you will have high-level roadmaps, meaning, okay, this is according to our vision, this is where we want to go. And also, you will have to provide some numbers. I mean, this is my financials, and if I have all these new initiatives that are aligned with my vision, I'm going to generate new income. So that's where you come from, and somehow you want to make sure that teams are going to deliver this. And of course, they will respond to change, because this is just a picture, but this is the starting point, okay, how we go down. So you need to define backlogs in 3 layers. Probably this is also familiar for you. We use portfolio level for epics, program level for features, and teams. Yeah? Nothing new if you are familiar with most of the scaling frameworks. And so what is that epic? An epic is just something that the business needs. So it's an initiative that has to have a business case. And you might introduce somebody like the epic owner. In the end, somebody owner of the epic, meaning that I have an idea that has to provide some business value, and I'm going to be trying to drive it through the company, making sure it happens. It doesn't mean you're going to execute, but you initiate, and you will make sure that it's going to happen. So you will define, okay, what's the epic, etc. So it's just understanding of scope high level. And what we use to make sure that we don't overload the company with work, because in the end, this is also about demand and capacity, we use a portfolio Kanban. So we also have, these are basically high-level the states, and we use upstream and downstream. So what you want to try is to build a flow of epics that basically are aligned with your strategy. And then once you have that clear, you have to go, let's say, 1 layer deeper. So features. In the end, features, we have, as I mentioned before, business and IT teams, meaning that they also deliver, let's say, business features or non-IT features. And a feature is something, whether a functionality or solution, that provides value to someone. Doesn't mean to be the final customer, but somebody is going to use it. So these are some examples of how we define a feature. So you want to define, okay, what's the benefit of this feature? What are the acceptance criteria? How do I know it's finished? Who's going to do it? Do we have dependencies? What's the priority? I mean, this is something you might tailor, depending on the company, but you're just trying to understand what's the work behind that feature, and that somehow it's aligned with the epic, and that you can execute. And for this, we also have another Kanban, which is a program Kanban, where we visualize the flow of features in upstream and downstream. And something that we have experienced over time is that normally when you start execution, you are so deep into delivering whatever you have planned, that you spend most of your efforts and time doing execution, and you forget the preparation. And preparation is key, because you also need to allocate time and effort to prepare things that will be executed in the next planning cycles. So upstream Kanban, it's a powerful tool to make sure that you don't leave to the end all the preparation work, and that you will be able to plan it properly. So, for example, this is some high-level description of what are the states. So here you can put just one liner. In analysis, basically, the POs have to define the feature with most of the info I explained before. And ready for PI, we do big room planning every 3 months, every 3-4 months. So basically, it's a feature that is kind of well-defined and shared with all the key stakeholders, so they can basically plan it. So these are some examples of, the product owner will create this with the fields. Also, in the next state, you see many more aspects. Basically, you have to define the feature at team level before you share it with the rest of the teams. And you have to start to understand, okay, do I need somebody else? Is something I can deliver myself? Do I need an external dependency? To whom I have to talk? And once you define to whom you have to talk, you talk, basically. So you socialize the feature with all these people in upstream, meaning that, okay, before they go to planning, they understand that they will have this thing to be planned. And once they get an understanding, you basically move it to ready for PI, and you update it. So you will get an understanding of, and all the people involved in the delivery of this, they will know it before they go. So when you go to the planning, it's kind of already socialized. We have some guidance we give to the teams, like, okay, if this is one increment, one program increment, and those are the sprints, so you should, high level, and it is just guidance, try to achieve that the refinement of your upstream follows this sequence, and then more or less you manage to get in the IP sprint with everything 100%, but meaning that in the 5th you have everything at least in analysis and a big proportion of it in ready for PI. So, and this is tough. I mean, this is really tough because most of the teams, they will be delivering a lot, and you have to make sure that you allocate time to this. So, and then you do the execution, so you plan, and everything that you plan, you have to deliver it. So you will basically execute the features over your planning, your PI, and deliver it. So the whole point is, how do we match capacity and demand? Because all this I show you, it's how you define work. So how we connect the portfolio to the, let's say, teams, and what features are going to flow through the Kanban system to the teams. But the teams have a capacity, and you have to make sure that you match capacity and demand. And this is the whole old story of, demand will be always much higher than capacity. And capacity will also be a way of limiting work and making sure you plan the right priorities. So if you don't do this try of match before, maybe you don't get the right prioritization process because you think that everything is going to fit in, and when you get to planning, you say, oops, no. And then you have discussions on priorities, but you should have them ideally before. So in the past, you had like one team delivering everything. Now you might have separate teams. So, in the past, when you needed more capacity, you just move people. Now you're basically moving people to teams. Teams should have stable capacity, and you have to understand that. So high level, what you do is for every feature you defined, I mean, most of the features, they can be delivered by one team, but if you have one feature that has dependencies, you also have to understand who has to do what, because you need to consider the capacity of the team to make sure that high level, it fits. Yeah? And also to make sure that you are not just always doing execution, we have capacity allocation per types. And this is something that, depending on how you define the teams, you might define differently, but make sure that, not 100% goes to features. So if the teams are doing end-to-end and they're doing maintenance, have an understanding of what amount of time they're going to do is spending on this. If you want to do upstream, so you have some presentations before, you might say one model is you have one team doing upstream, other team doing downstream. If you combine both, you need to make sure that they have capacity for upstream. So the percentages will differ per team. It will differ per skill set, but the capacity allocation category should be kind of similar across all the teams. So in the end, what you have, it's about prioritization of the backlogs. You can use different ways. You can use WSDF. In the end, if you know what's coming and the size of it and basically your capacity, you will be able to use this to make sure that before you go, you are putting to plan the top priorities according to the strategy. And this will mean conversations with the tribe leads, with key stakeholders. So it's a whole process that involves a lot of time. And now you might say, and for those who speak Spanish, vaya pedazo milonga que me está contando este tío. So, okay, moto me está vendiendo. Anyway, so now what we're going to show you is some real examples before we finish, and then you can, if you have any questions, we might cover them. So how we do this, probably some of these slides you will be familiar with if you're doing SAFe, but okay, we have this big room planning where basically for 2 days we put 100+ people in a room and we plan the work of a PI. Before we do that, we've been doing all these upstream story to make sure that everything is kind of prepared for this. So you will plan the work, break it into sprints, make sure that, if there are problems, you discuss them at the first day. Then also you will address risks, you will do the confidence vote, and retrospective. So this is something like, let's say, standard. And you might also, every epic belongs to a strategic theme according to the strategy. You also have an understanding before and during how much work per initiative and per epic and per strategic category you are putting into the system. Meaning that you can have a quick overview of how much emphasis I'm doing on certain initiatives or strategic directions. And this is something that you have to prepare, you have to discuss with tribe leads, so the overall amount of work that goes to the teams makes sense according to the priority of the company. We also have this, which is something we prepare upfront based on all the work we've done in the upstream part. So for every feature, which team is going to deliver, if they have a dependency with another team. And these are the external dependencies because not everybody is in the Agile team, so we have lawyers. We cannot have a lawyer in every Scrum team. So you will have sometimes dependencies with legal or with other departments that have to do something. And we want to make sure that we identify these first. The head of legal, head of finance, whoever is going to have to deliver something, they know beforehand. So by the time they go to the planning process, they have an idea of the work that's coming, and they can more or less plan better. So it's going to be less improvise. So yeah, basically there's some way of planning. So you have to understand the capacity, you own it. A feature you have to deliver, you own it. And you have to plan all the dependencies, and you have to formulate objectives. So this is just a way we basically make sure that all the teams do the same thing in the same color. So color codes are standard. So in one view, you can see how the structure of the work is across the teams. This is one example of after the first day. So it's a big room. This is basically one team. So each one of these areas is one team, and you have all of them in one place. And we do this 3 times per year. And then I'm going to show you some artifacts we came up with. And basically, we have an Obeya room. It's a big room we have where we have things. So this is an example of a portfolio Kanban in physical. Each one of these cards is one epic. And you see more as the states. And we also have it replicated in digital, so you can measure it. This is an example of our program board with the teams, and also the program Kanban. So you see the flow of the features, and when they go to done, so when they are in execution, they jump to done to here. So this is another example, and we have it in digital. So all the features, you have all the description in the tooling done by the teams, and you also have the dependencies in digital. This is an example of Scrum team in physical, and in digital, the replica. We also have Kanban teams in run, so each one of these teams will have a different Kanban board designed specifically by them. If you want to know more about how we implemented Kanban, there is going to be a wonderful session later on by one of our coaches in the Agile for 90, how we basically roll out Kanban across the company. This is an example of an operations team. So this is basically the flow of operations department of a business, let's say, as usual. And we also have everything replicated in the tooling, so you can do measurements. And we also have something like a digital Obeya. So we came up with certain metrics that we want to share with the teams at team level and program level, and that the data is generated by the teams to have the right conversations to improve the system. So this is an example of capacity. So basically, for every team, based on the work types, you try to measure how much space they are devoting to each one of them, and also help you forecast, because when you're going to plan, you need to have a forecast of how you're going to allocate the capacity of your team to the features. You also have dashboards where you can see the work that's coming per team and how much work compared to capacity and demand. So basically, you are sizing everything, sizing demand, and matching them, and getting some kind of radar of how much you're loading your team before, so you can have the conversations of, okay, come on, we have to remove features before we do the planning. This doesn't make sense. And this is something also that we get from the tooling we have. We also have one dashboard for the teams to make sure that they can do this in Jira, but also per team, per status of the Kanban board, the program Kanban, how much they are doing in terms of delivery. So in one view, they can see the progress, and it really helps the POs because they can later on they can dig in and see all the user stories, etc. But in one view, you see how you're doing in terms of execution. We also try to compare the forecast before the planning to the actuals, so you get a feeling of how good are you at estimating. And then later on, if you have features that are kind of similar, you can use experience. And this is not to say, okay, you are forecasting good or not, your estimations are fantastic or are not. It's about, okay, guys, this is your data. You are sizing the work before it goes, you are executing it, and over time you're generating a lot of data that you might use to be able to estimate better at the end of the day. We also do dashboards for program objectives. We do objectives, meaning what's the value outcome of this, and per program increment, so you can see per program how it is. We also have like maturity scan, which probably most of you use in many places. So how the team is doing in certain aspects, and you can basically use it for coaching purposes. Yeah. So this was just a quick overview of things we have implemented, and this is just a journey. The whole point is that try to get as much data as you can from the teams. We always talk about empirism and data. You're going to generate a lot of data, and it's very important that teams get that, okay, guys, all this info is coming from you, your estimations, your execution, how good you are doing or not. It's about how we improve the team and the system as a whole. And we want to do that having the right conversations with the right stakeholders based on facts. So I believe that it's very powerful to collect all this info because you can have the right conversations later on. So as a conclusion, before we go to Q&A, basically, this is like a marathon. I mean, sometimes you will get tired. Sometimes the process is going to be chaotic. People will complain. People will not understand things. You have to explain the same thing 20 times. And even so, another 20 times more. And you're going to have issues at the top, at the middle, at the bottom. So it's going to be tiring. Sometimes, if you are in the transformation process, you might say, come on, I just give up, let somebody else do it. So you will need resilience. You will need to be there and to be always working on this. But in the end, even if when you finish, you will continue, because this is a never-ending process, if you work on it, in the end, it can be done. Thank you. So, questions?
Thanks for the presentation and sharing the insights. One question that I have is, you were mentioning that you also included business into the teams.
Yes.
You were showing the different chapters.
Yes.
How do you manage, or do you encounter the situation where you end up with way too many people for a Scrum team, or?
No, I mean, the size of the teams, I mean, a Scrum team should be a Scrum team, meaning that when one thing is a chapter, basically a chapter is where people belong, like kind of their department, let's say, and the structure you put, like Agile team, meaning Scrum team, that's a Scrum team, meaning we don't want more than 10, 11 people. So you might have chapters with more than 10, 11 people, but you will not have Scrum teams with more than.
I understand that, but what you were saying is, if you have a Scrum team that is responsible end-to-end, you have different people from different chapters in the team.
Yes, so every Scrum team, the composition might be different, depending on the product and depending on the skills you need for that.
And to get the representation from several chapters that belong to business, don't you end up with?
No, it's so basically you define, okay, what's the scope of this team? so what they are supposed to deliver. And in a perfect world, what would be all the skills I need to be able to deliver so I can have the less dependencies with the outside world? Sometimes we will not be able to put everybody because maybe it becomes too big. Maybe the way they interact is just sporadic, but you try to say, okay, what's the skill that's going to be persistent? So I need every day, and you will try to get it from the departments, from the chapters, meaning that you will have IT developers, but you might also have marketing people, you might have people specialists in online things, or product development. But depending on the scope, let's say, of the Scrum team. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Well, first, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question also related with the chapters, because you told that you have the chapters that are specific on certain material. So in that case, you put the people from that chapter on the different squads or different teams. But you also mentioned that you had some chapters that were dedicated to business as usual.
Yes.
So what do they do? Exactly, because I have not understood.
So business as usual in our company, for example, it's like, okay, you create new products, but you have a call center. You have operations department doing underwriting, or making sure that when there is a transaction in a product, it takes place. So you get a payment, or you get a claim, whatever. So that's the run teams. I mean, there are teams doing basically the daily management of work.
So you mean, for example, solving issues or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just processes. So any process you have that doesn't involve changing things, you might have departments like finance, you know, they're doing accounting. That's business as usual. I mean, it's a never-ending story. You have treasury, you might have investment, you might have lawyers. That's a kind of run chapter, because in the end, they might spend some time supporting the change teams, but they also have work which is never ending. You know, as a lawyer, contracts and having trials and whatever you have, you know, depending on the nature of the chapter.
Okay, thank you.
Javier, thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to ask you, sometimes when you hear companies explaining how they went to Agile, right? And you see, well, something like similar to the issues and model you explained us, sometimes it seems like it was a very well-defined model from the very beginning, right? And sometimes when they explained it to you, in most cases they are like in the end point, so everything fixed. You know,
no, it's not. It is not, believe me.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, how was it? Did you detailed a model you wanted to go to and started and went for it, or you've been iterating and adjusting the model until you more or less have what you've shown us today?
Okay, so the way we started is that to make sure that this is consistent across business units, meaning countries, we also want that if any country scales, it kind of follows the same format. Of course, it's going to be local. The chapters will be different. The tribes will be different. The Scrum teams will be different. But we want to end up with a model where if you have incremental planning every 3 months, every country that wants to scale follows the same. So you don't have one country doing less, another one doing something else. So that's one. And we've been doing this not only in Spain, but in other countries. So the whole idea is that you try to collect experience from different business units. And let's say that you have a high-level blueprint. We call it blueprint, call it playbook, call it whatever, document like this, full of things. And we have an initial view. So high level, we said, okay, we want it makes sense to use some kind of Spotify thing. We also like the concepts of having incremental planning as a team of teams every 3 months, because it creates alignment, it creates transparency. So we like that, but we also need to tailor it. So it's not like we copy the book. And of course, that was the beginning, but there are lots of learnings in the countries coming from execution. So you might come with the idea like, okay, let's try to standardize chapter taxonomy. We call it taxonomy, you know. Like, but maybe you can standardize some chapter taxonomy, meaning that every country is going to have a legal chapter, probably every country will have a accounting chapter, but then there's going to be specifics. And it's also about the organization, so it's going to be also political to some extent. So the process makes you to realize that your ideas, okay, maybe we need to adapt. So the whole point is that this book, this blueprint, it's something that it's live. So we are updating it based on the input from experience, meaning that in future, at least we know that, okay, we've tried this in several places, and we see several patterns. So we see things that might work, things that might not, and things that we might want to standardize because it makes sense. Like, okay, if you have stripes and chapters, you have stripes and chapters. You cannot come up with another structure. But then in other areas, much more flexibility. So, but it's an iterative process. I think I mean, if you look at the, let's say, common elements, it's converging. Of course, if you look at the specifics, it differs. I mean, specifics meaning the number of chapters, the number of Scrum teams, the number of tribes. The strategy might be different. Even per country, maybe you have here some business lines that in other countries you don't have. So you are doing some sort of business in another country that maybe it requires something different. So yes, so there is some commonalities. Yeah. Thank you, guys.